Ladies and gentlemen, within each of us lies a vast inner landscape, rich with light and shadow, where the soul weaves its deepest truths. Yet, in there is a kind of spiritual desolation that takes root in the individual who never turns inward. In such a person, life becomes a continuous sequence of distractions, a forward rush into outer events, obligations, and performances, without ever pausing to ask the essential questions. Who am I? What do I truly feel? Why do I repeat the same patterns? This avoidance of the inner gaze does not protect the self, it fragments it. To live without reflection is to be a stranger to one's own soul. One becomes like a leaf blown by external winds, a creature of habit, opinion, and societal conditioning. Without inner reflection, one never notices the deeper motives behind their actions. The anger that erupts may be seen as justified, yet never examined. The sadness that lingers may be misnamed or buried under false smiles. The desires that drive choices may not even belong to the self, but are inherited from others, parents, cultures, or crowds. The reflective individual dares to stand still in silence. In that silence, images rise from the depths, childhood memories long forgotten, painful truths half buried, and unfulfilled longings that ache for attention. The absence of this silence, this deliberate confrontation with the self, is the absence of soul. The person who flees from their own interiority becomes hollow, their actions mechanical, their relationships superficial. They may speak often, even eloquently, but their words carry no weight, for they do not originate from lived truth. Without reflection, there is no encounter with the shadow, that part of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. And without meeting the shadow, there is no growth, only repetition. Life becomes a wheel, turning endlessly in the same grooves, while the person wonders why fulfillment never arrives. The unexamined life may appear successful by outward standards, but inwardly it is barren. It lacks the depth that comes from self-knowledge and from wrestling with the contradictions and mysteries of the psyche. A soul-filled life requires the courage to enter the darkened room of the self, to light the candle and face what lies there. The person who reflects dares to become whole, to confront not only the light in them, but the darkness as well. They begin to shape their life from within, rather than be shaped unconsciously by forces they refuse to acknowledge. Thus, the absence of inner reflection is not a harmless omission. It is a profound spiritual wound. It severs the link between the conscious mind and the deeper self. To restore soul, one must reclaim the quiet hour, the difficult question, the honest answer. Only then can the true journey begin. Modern age, many wander through life disconnected from this inner depth, becoming what one might call soulless beings. To be soulless is not merely to lack spirit, but to live without genuine connection to one's own inner world or to the profound mystery of existence. In the heart of every human being lies a wellspring of emotion, raw, untamed, and sacred. It is through this emotional depth that we experience the fullness of life. Joy that sings like light across the skin, grief that bends the spine toward the earth, love that expands the chest until it aches. These are not mere moods. They are movements of the soul, bridges between the seen and unseen, the known and unknown. But when this capacity for genuine feeling withers, when emotions are no longer lived but merely acted, a quiet tragedy unfolds, the erosion of authentic emotion. This erosion is not always sudden. It often begins in small betrayals of the self. A child learns early to suppress tears, to be strong, to smile when afraid, to perform happiness for approval. Over time, this performance becomes habitual. The person wears a face that no longer mirrors the inner world. What they show becomes what others wish to see, not what the soul truly feels. Thus begins the great forgetting. Eventually, emotion is no longer a lived experience, but a conditioned response. Laughter becomes hollow, tears rehearsed, anger exaggerated or entirely repressed. The individual loses the ability to distinguish between what is felt and what is expected. They may speak of love, but their eyes remain distant. They may speak of pain, but it lacks resonance, as if they are narrating a story rather than living it. The words are there, but the soul has gone silent. In such a state, relationships suffer. connections lose their vitality. Without authentic emotion, we cannot touch another being with truth. We may be physically near, but spiritually estranged. There is no real intimacy, because intimacy demands vulnerability, and vulnerability requires feeling real feeling. Without it, one becomes an actor in the theater of life, performing roles, speaking lines, but never being. This emotional sterility also affects the inner life. Dreams fade or become chaotic. Art loses its power. Music no longer moves. Even beauty, that ancient language of the soul, becomes invisible. The world flattens. Life becomes practical, efficient, orderly, but devoid of wonder. And in this dull, quiet numbness, the soul begins to shrink, as if deprived of oxygen. The danger here is profound, for when a person loses the ability to feel deeply, they also lose the compass that guides moral choice. Conscience is not merely a set of rules. It is the soul's response to life, informed by empathy, sorrow, and reverence. Without feeling, cruelty becomes easy, indifference sets in, the person becomes capable of harm, not from malice, but from disconnection. Yet all is not lost. The soul may retreat, but it does not vanish. Beneath the surface, the emotions still wait. Sometimes they erupt in a dream, a breakdown, a sudden moment of weeping when the mask slips. These moments are not failures. They are invitations, the soul knocking. The question is whether we will answer, whether we will allow ourselves to feel again, even if it hurts, even if it shakes the very foundation of who we thought we were. To feel authentically is not weakness. It is strength of the deepest kind. It is the courage to remain human in a world that often rewards numbness. It is the path back to soul, back to truth, back to life itself. There is a subtle but corrosive hunger that haunts many lives, the hunger for approval, applause, affirmation. This craving, though often masked as ambition or confidence, is in truth a quiet desperation. The longing to be seen, to be valued, to matter, but only through the eyes of others. The person caught in the grip of this hunger becomes a mirror, not a self. They live not from within, but in response to the gaze of the outside world. Such a person may appear outwardly successful, even admired. Their actions are polished, their image carefully crafted, their words rehearsed to provoke the right reaction. But beneath this surface is an anxious emptiness, a sense that their worth is never secure, never quite enough. They chase likes, titles, praise not for the thing itself, but because it fills, if only briefly, a deep void. A void created when one's center of gravity shifts away from the soul and into the shifting tides of external opinion. This fixation is not born out of vanity alone. It often has deeper roots, an early wound, a moment when the true self was dismissed, shamed, or ignored. In that moment, the child learns that authenticity is not safe, and so they begin to construct a false self, one that pleases, performs, adapts. Over time, this constructed identity becomes so convincing that even they believe it. But it is fragile, for it depends entirely on the unpredictable and often cruel reflections given by others. In this state, life becomes a performance, and the self becomes a role. Choices are no longer guided by inner truth, but by social calculation. The person asks not, "What is right for me?" but rather, "What will they think? What will gain me praise? What will shield me from rejection?" The tragedy here is that while the applause may come, it never satisfies. It is never enough, because it is directed not at the real self, but at the mask, and so the anxiety grows. The person becomes addicted to external signals, the nod of approval, the compliment, the recognition. When those signals are absent, they feel invisible, unanchored. They may try harder, become louder, more extreme, anything to provoke a reaction. But the more they rely on the outside world for their sense of self, the more they lose access to the inner voice, the one that whispers with quiet certainty and leads toward truth. The soul does not shout. It does not compete. It waits patiently to be heard, but in a life consumed by validation, seeking, its voice is drowned out by the noise of the crowd. The person may even begin to fear solitude, for in silence the hollowness becomes audible. And yet, it is only in that silence that healing begins. To break this dependence on external validation is a radical act. It requires turning away from the mirror of public opinion and returning to the unpolished, mysterious inner self. It requires asking terrifying questions. What do I desire, apart from what others want from me? What do I value, even if no one else praises it? Who am I, when no one is watching? These are not easy questions, but they are essential if one wishes to live with soul. When a person begins to live from within, something remarkable happens. Their actions become less about impressing and more about expressing. Their words gain weight because they come from truth, not performance. Their relationships deepen, for they are no longer based on manipulation or image, but on mutual recognition. And most importantly, they begin to taste the rare peace of self, possession of knowing that one's worth is not up for negotiation. In the end, the pursuit of external validation is a hunger that can never be satisfied. It is a mirage. True nourishment comes from aligning with the self that existed before the world told you who you should be. That self is quiet but powerful, and once you listen to it, truly listen, you will no longer need the applause, because you will have found your own voice, and that at last is freedom. There is a tendency in the modern mind shaped by reason, speed, and control to reject what cannot be measured, named, or explained. This rejection is often seen as progress, as clarity, as maturity. But beneath it lies a dangerous forgetting, the forgetting of mystery, of the vast unknown that lives within and beyond us. When a person turns away from mystery and denies the unconscious, they do not become more powerful, they become diminished. They cut themselves off from the very source of life's depth, vitality, and transformation. The unconscious is not some distant or exotic realm. It is always present, breathing beneath the surface of awareness. It speaks in dreams, in sudden moods, in symbols that emerge in art, in slips of the tongue, in the intuition that knows before thought can catch up. It is the dark soil in which the conscious mind is rooted. And mystery is its language, a language not of direct answers, but of images, sensations, paradoxes. It does not conform to logic. It reveals by suggestion, by silence, by symbol, yet the soulless being turns away from this. They fear what they cannot control. They want clarity, certainty, sharp lines, and bright lights. The ambiguous, the paradoxical, the unresolvable, these are dismissed as distractions or nonsense. They scoff at myth, ignore dreams, and mock the spiritual as superstition. In doing so, they flatten reality into what can be grasped by the intellect alone. But the soul does not live by facts, it lives by meaning. To reject mystery is to reject the very dimension of life where growth and healing take place. It is in mystery that the wounded parts of the self are revealed and invited into wholeness. It is in mystery that the symbols of transformation, the phoenix, the labyrinth, the dark forest lead us through initiations no logic could map. The unconscious is the womb of creativity and the theater of inner truth. To deny it is to walk through life half awake, with eyes open but vision closed. This rejection often disguises itself as strength or clarity, but it is rooted in fear. Fear of losing control, fear of confronting the shadow, that hidden aspect of ourselves we would rather deny. But to refuse the unconscious is not to avoid darkness. It is to be ruled by it from below, unknowingly. Repressed fears, unexamined desires, and disowned traits do not disappear, they act out through projection, addiction, and blind repetition. The person thinks they are free, but they are merely unconscious. Moreover, without mystery there is no awe, and without awe there is no reverence. Life becomes utilitarian, reduced to tasks and outcomes. The stars become only burning gas, the forest just timber, the soul a myth for poets. In this narrowed vision, beauty fades, ritual loses meaning, and the sacred becomes irrelevant. The world is stripped of its enchantment, and with it, the soul of the person begins to wither. But mystery is not the enemy. It is the invitation. It invites us to let go of knowing and to enter into relationship with the unknown, to trust what arises in silence, to explore what emerges in dreams, to engage the symbols that appear with uncanny timing. The unconscious does not ask us to abandon reason, but to expand it to make room for feeling, imagination, archetype, and myth. It offers not certainty, but depth, not answers, but transformation. To embrace mystery is to reclaim the full range of the human experience. It is to walk into the forest of the psyche and encounter the creatures that live there, some terrifying, some beautiful, all necessary. It is to admit that we are not masters of ourselves, but travelers in a vast and ancient inner world. And it is only when we bow to that mystery, when we make space for the unknown, that the soul begins to stir again. For in mystery there is life, in mystery there is soul, in mystery there is the possibility of becoming more than what the ego alone could ever imagine. There is a quiet ache that haunts those who have lost the capacity for meaningful connection, an emptiness that no conversation, no crowd, no digital interaction can truly touch. It is the loneliness of being surrounded yet unseen, of speaking without truly being heard, of reaching out and finding only surfaces, not souls. In this state, the heart grows silent and the soul withdraws. A person may move through the motions of relationship, the greetings, the meetings, the gestures of friendliness, but underneath, there is a vast inner desert, dry and uninhabited. This incapacity for connection is not simply a lack of social skill. It is a symptom of deeper disconnection, a severing from the authentic self, one who cannot feel deeply, who hides behind personas, who has exiled vulnerability, cannot form bonds that matter. They may collect acquaintances like objects, charm others with masks, perform empathy with practiced ease, but it is all hollow. Real connection requires truth, and truth demands the courage to be seen as we are raw, flawed, unfinished, human. In a world increasingly obsessed with speed, efficiency, and appearance, meaningful connection becomes rare not because it is impossible, but because it is costly. It requires presence. It requires stillness. It requires that one stops performing and starts listening not just to the other, but to the silent stirrings within. The soulless being has lost this ability. To them, people are instruments, mirrors, distractions, not mysteries. Every interaction is transactional, driven by gain or escape. There is no sacredness in it, no reverence for the other as a living soul. Such a person fears intimacy, though they may not admit it. They fear the surrender it demands. For to truly connect is to risk disappointment, to risk rejection, to risk transformation. It is to allow the other to challenge the illusion of control. And for the one disconnected from their own soul, this is unbearable. It is safer to remain on the surface, to talk about weather and trends and nothing that truly matters. Safer to smile without feeling, to nod without hearing, to touch without presence. Yet the cost of this safety is profound. Without meaningful connection, the soul starves. We are not made to live in isolation, not just physical isolation, but the deeper kind, the isolation of being unknown. The soul longs to be mirrored, not by praise or flattery, but by recognition. It longs to say, "Here I am," and to hear the same in return. It longs for communion with another person, with nature, with the divine. When that longing is denied, it turns into restlessness, anxiety, addiction, despair. And this disconnection does not only damage the self, it fractures the fabric of community. It leads to cultures of alienation, where people speak past each other, where empathy is confused with opinion, where silence is feared and presence is rare. It leads to relationships where bodies are close but souls are far apart. It leads to a society full of noise, but devoid of listening. But reconnection is possible. It begins with the self. It begins when one dares to feel again, to listen again, to see again. When one drops the mask, not all at once, but little by little. When one chooses depth over comfort, truth over convenience. It begins with a single honest conversation, with a moment of shared silence that says more than words ever could. It begins when we recognize that to connect meaningfully is not a luxury, it is a spiritual necessity. The soul, after all, is relational by nature. It seeks encounter, not just with others, but with the world, with beauty, with mystery. When this capacity is restored, life changes, words gain weight, eyes speak, touch heals, even solitude becomes rich because it is no longer emptiness, but communion with the self. And in this way, soul returns not as an idea, but as a living presence. To truly connect is to be alive in the fullest sense, to be met, and to meet another without pretense or agenda. In that moment, something sacred happens, something that no technology, no performance, no surface pleasure can replicate. In that moment, the soul breathes again,